Hi, I'm Doug Besheroff. I teach at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, and we're just delighted to have this session co-sponsoring with the Bipartisan um, Policy Center. My job is to crack one joke, introduce our speaker, and sit down and enjoy the conversation. So that's my plan. So my joke, which is not exactly a joke, but quite related to this day's conversation. I had two experiences with online chat this week. The first one, and I will name names, was with Brooks Brothers. And the second one was with FiOS. Okay. Brooks Brothers was fast, efficient. It was terrific. I want to read, I wrote it down, what the end conversation was. Will I be getting a confirming email? The answer, awesome. Awesome. Let me process it real quick. Thank you for the purchase. You were great. Are you a machine? No, I'm not, Douglas. No comma. So are you AI? I'm a human, Douglas. Anyway, have a good day. Thanks much. We thank you for our purchase. Thank you for chatting with Brooks Brothers, Douglas Besheroff. At the bottom, it said, powered by Gladly. I looked up Gladly, and this is an AI. So she lied, or he, or it, whatever. They. You are saying they? Whoa, okay. So I did Brooks Brothers first. And Brooks Brothers must have been a faster machine. No, I did FiOS, excuse me. And FiOS must have been a human being that had to select the answer, because the answers were pre-selected. You could tell that because there were no typos. It took, the Brooks thing was 3 minutes, 4 minutes. FiOS was half an hour. So I'm at the end of this conversation saying, I want AI the next time I connect. So this is, I hope, part of what you all talk about, which is we consumers, we don't care if it's going to, end our privacy, make mass unemployment. I want to be able to order my FiOS equipment as fast as I can order a shirt. That's the end of that. Okay, that's my joke. You know the topic. You know what people are going to talk about. I've seen the slides. They're great. So Stefano Scarpetta is the director for the Directorate of Employment, Labor, Social Affairs of the OECD. He has had that position since 2013 to translate those topics. He supervises employment research, labor market issues, migration, health, skills, gender, and inequalities. And for those of you who don't know about the OECD, not only does it perform cross-country research, but it provides technical assistance to the countries involved and evaluates programs on request. He's published extensively, American Economic Review, Economic Journal, Economic Policy, International Journal of Industrial Organization, and Labor Economics. I go this because let me go with his education because I like the last entry, and then I'll get out of the way. Okay, so Stefano holds a PhD from the School of Advanced Studies and Social Sciences in Paris, a master's in economics from the London School of Economics, and he graduated summa cum laude from the University of Rome, La Sapienza. And I would love to go to a school called La Sapienza instead of UMD. So what can I say? I'm out of my league here, but I'm not AI, as you can tell. Anyway, Stefano, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doug, and good afternoon to all of you, those of you who are here and also all of those who are connected. And let me say that it's really a great pleasure to have an opportunity to be here with you and to present some of the work we have been doing at the OECD on the impact of artificial intelligence on the labor market. This was summarized in the 23 edition of our annual publication on employment. It's called the Employment Outlook. And a big caveat, because I think you all understand that AI is evolving very, very rapidly at a much faster pace than any economist, even with the best intention, can possibly try to capture and to measure. So there's a lot of assessment, a lot of statement. Sometimes there is a lot of dystopic points of view. This is going to be the end of the labor market. This is going to be fantastic. So depending who you ask, you can get quite different pictures. So what we have done at the OECD, and that actually has to say predates ChatGPT, generative AI, is to actually go and look at what's happening for those companies who are using artificial intelligence. So we actually ran a survey over and above all the additional work we have been doing to 2,000 companies, 5,300 workers in manufacturing services of 7 countries of the OECD. Asking fairly detailed questions, both to managers, to the employers, but also to the workers themselves. The big caveat is that this survey was run in 2022. We thought that we're ahead of the curve. We had the survey, nobody else has done something like that across countries. How wrong we were. That was 2022. In November of 22, you know, remember what happened? The first large language model, ChatGPT, was launched. I think there are more than 100 million people using different type of generative AI. So what I will present you is the best sort of evidence we have, but to some extent predates the latest development of artificial intelligence, which no doubt is likely to affect significantly all of us, the way we work, the way we live, so it will have economic and social impact. So let me walk you through some of the evidence about what are the results of this survey. The first point I want to mention is that this whole idea, this is going to be the end of work, is not really born into the evidence. When we ask the employers and companies about whether or not the use of AI meant that they were reducing employment, you see that there are some differences, but basically more than 50% of the employers said no, it had no impact on employment. In some of them, actually, employment increased. In some other companies, employment declined. So far, we cannot really see that there has been a massive sort of shift away from worker and more of the technology, artificial intelligence. It has to be said that when we look at the data, basically only 10% of companies are using AI in production processes. When you ask large companies, you're already at 1/3. Of course, this is also evolving very rapidly now. When we ask why you have not adjusted employment, the answer was that because there's still a significant degree of uncertainty as to what is the potential of AI. So we are testing and see. And basically the way in which they were adjusting employment was by attrition, so not renewing some of the contract and letting people go, but not really sort of substituting workers with the technology itself. Let's move one step ahead and let's ask the worker this time. How was the experience of you actually working side by side with artificial intelligence? And here again, there is an interesting point. You see that the dark part of the bars point to improvement a lot or a little. So if you take the two of them, you're talking about 4 out of 5 workers saying that artificial intelligence has improved their performance, their enjoyment of the work, and actually that even had a positive effect on their physical health, undoing, basically not asking them to do some of the things that might be dangerous or risky, and even mental health. So to some extent, many workers said that they were able to focus on the most interesting part of their job, leaving to the artificial intelligence some of the things that were more repetitive, sometimes dangerous, and certainly less interesting for themselves. So this is the positive part of my talk. Now there are a number of issues, as you can possibly imagine. Otherwise, it will not be interesting. So the first thing is that let's now project ourselves with all the caveats, with all the limitation of making any projection on something that is progressing at the speed of light. So we have looked at not just artificial intelligence, but digital technology, what is affecting in terms of competences of the workers, and we have mapped that into what actually workers do in different occupations, right? And we said not tomorrow, but in the next 10 years, what is going to happen to the jobs? And by doing that and going very granular, looking at actually activities performed by individual workers using our survey of adult skills, we basically came up with the numbers that you have here. So basically suggesting that not tomorrow, but in the next 10 years, 27% of the job on average, less so in the United States, are likely to be completely transformed by digital technology and artificial intelligence. Let me just be clear. This job might not disappear. We're not talking about 27% less jobs. many new jobs will be created, but these jobs will be transformed. So the point is more whether or not the workers would have the skills and the ability to adapt their competences to perform the kind of task that this job will require them to do. Again, it's not for tomorrow, but it's the next 10 years. Now, if I were to factor in generative AI, probably this 10 years will be shortened significantly, and possibly the range of tasks that could be performed by artificial intelligence can be widened. But one interesting point of that is that in previous study of the OECD, we said that a very significant chunk of the task would be completely replaceable by the use of technology. Now I think we are talking about a quarter, or in between a quarter and a third of the tasks, and be completely be performed by the technology, by digital technology and artificial intelligence. The rest will be more in the hands of the humans. But even that part that we say in the hand of the humans would require different skills, a different way of working. So there's a lot of potential for complementarities, but without investment in human capital, these complementarities might not be fully achieved. Now let's ask the worker themselves how they feel about not today, but the future. And when you do that, you see that there's a significant fraction of the workers who are worried about the future. They're worried about losing the job in the next 10 years, 3 out of 5 workers. And 1 in 5 is actually extremely worried. They see already the potential for many of the tasks in their job to be completely replaceable by what the machine, the algorithm can do. In the US, the survey result actually that one of the reasons why company might be using artificial intelligence is actually to reduce staff costs. So there's also this concern. And what is already pretty evident is that why workers, as I said before, are actually enjoying the fact that they're working side by side with artificial intelligence. They are worried about the pace of work. So there's been acceleration in the pace of work. So they work more sort of to some extent with a higher pace and less time to do. So, I mean, there is an issue about sort of the job being there, and potentially also a possible issue about the quality of the job they are performing. Some workers think, because they see themselves to be complementary to artificial intelligence, that this might lead to an increase in the wages, but a significant proportion of the workers actually claim that they see a risk either of losing their job or to see actually their pay diminishing, because some of the more high-paid part of their job could potentially be automated. Now, I think it's worth to pause for a second and reflect on what kind of competence skill are we talking about. Here is really a super simplistic view of the world in which I present you 3 steps of the industrial sort of era until the 80s, in which we have basically replaced what is artisanal expertise, so people doing everything from A to Z by themselves or in a very small group, into mass production. And we need mass expertise, and we need a lot of production work and office work. The computer era, because we are not starting now with artificial intelligence, has to some extent challenged mass expertise, because many things can be automated already, and we have actually promoted a lot what we can call elite expertise, abstract decision-making, management, law, medicine, engineering. This actually is a taxonomy that comes from the work of David Autor. Now, what could be the impact of artificial intelligence? To some extent, some of what we can call elite expertise might actually be fully replaced or largely replaceable by large language models. We might not need as many coders that we used to have, because many of the coding can be done by the algorithm themselves if you know what you want to code on, if you have a basic knowledge about coding. Some of the activities which were highly specialized, like lawyers, part of the work of the lawyers might be done, designers, and I can go on and on. What seems to be, and this only say seems to be because it's still really an area in which we are developing, is we need actually expert judgment. We need to be able to basically assess what is right and what is wrong. So critical thinking, I think, becomes even more important, combined with some specialized competence which are fully complementary to AI. David Autor actually claims that to some extent artificial intelligence may affect what we economists call the hollowing of the middle. So the digital revolution, the computer era, basically brought a hollowing of the middle. Occupation in the middle of the skill distribution actually were going down in terms of number, and there was a strong demand either for highly specialized skills at top end of the wage distribution, or for a number of relatively low-skill jobs at lower end of the skill distribution, because these are in service sector where the digital technology is not playing a role. Well, to some extent, these new element of the digital revolution, the artificial intelligence, in particular generative AI, may actually allow a lot of those who are basically in the hollowing part of basically seeing their jobs, the number of jobs being declining, have a new chance, because can enable people without specialized competence to perform tasks that before they were not able to, exactly by being assisted of artificial intelligence, generative AI. So there is a significant change in the type of skills that are most susceptible to automation and the bottlenecks to automation. We call bottlenecks those things that even the latest development of generative AI may not be able to reproduce as well as we do humans. So the question is that these bottlenecks are evolving very rapidly, and many of the things we thought were actually bottlenecks may no longer be basically bottlenecks. But one thing that I want to underline more is that all of us, in all our function, whether actually consulting for a service, the artificial intelligence, and more specifically working side by side with artificial intelligence, or using any evidence, any information coming from artificial intelligence, we require a lot of critical thinking. Being able to assess, to basically write the right questions, use the technology in the right way, and be able also to assess what we get in terms of the output. So we need as much knowledge as before, but also because this knowledge, in my view, is essential in order to use and to exercise this critical thinking. Now, if you ask the employers, what is preventing you from using more of artificial intelligence, there were two major answers. One is the cost. Some of these models actually cost a significant amount of money. But actually, the second important thing was actually the lack of skills from the workforce. I cannot use the technology because I don't have enough workers who have the right skill to basically perform side by side with the technology itself. 1 in 2 employers in the US cite the lack of skill as one of the main barriers for adopting more of AI. And these are companies who are already using AI, not companies that are thinking of using AI. Across countries are 2 out of 5 of the employers. The research also suggests that employers are investing on the human capital, if you like, of the workers, but sometimes there is a big need for supporting them in assessing what it is that they have to train the workforce for. So investment in human capitals, not only through education, I will not spend time on that, but actually through training and retraining program is one area which will be fundamental to allow the technology to actually be used to a larger extent, but also to secure the fact that this technology is used side by side with workers, so workers can also benefit from that. This will not necessarily have a disruptive impact on the labor market by creating more in unemployment or basic reduction in employment. So the question, this is not in the survey itself, but it's through the work we have done at OECD for a long period of time. How are we doing on investing in training and retraining for the adult population? Again, I will not say much about initial education. There's a huge chapter there of how artificial intelligence, digital transformation has to modify significantly our curricula, we are basically teaching our students, and how combine more academic to more sort of a technical vocational education. But that's another story. Here, just focus on the investment in adult learning through training and retraining programs. Now, here you see the difference across countries in the number of adults who participate in formal or non-formal job-related learning over a period over here. So you see difference across country. You see that US, on average, many workers participate in some form of training. But what I want you to focus on is more on the gap between the high skilled and the low skilled. Whatever country of the OECD you are in all countries, there is a huge gap, a very large gap, 1 to 3 on average, in between low skilled and the high skilled. Now, you might argue that the low skilled are the one, wherever they are, whatever sector they are, that need to update and upgrade their skills. So they need to participate more in training and retraining to make sure they can keep their job. And in fact, they are the one who receive less training than the high skilled. I could have shown you this chart not by the level of skills, but by age. Of course, the young people receive much more training than the adults and the seniors. I could have shown the same chart by the size of the firm. Those in large firms receive much more training than those in small and medium-sized enterprise. I can even show you, unfortunately, a chart in which I show you men and women. More men receive training than women, also because there is segregation in certain occupations. But unless not only we invest much, much more in training, but we close this gap between some under participating people and those who actually receive a lot of training, and we adapt the training program themselves. I think the challenge going forward of the greater use of the technology, digital technology, and artificial intelligence into the labor market will inevitably translate into tensions into the labor market, not only in terms of job, but also the quality of jobs. And actually, we reduce significantly the potential for companies to take the best out of the technology. So for the technology, to some extent, to contribute to productivity growth and economic growth. One of the good things which we analyze to a large extent into the employment outlook is also that the artificial intelligence and digital technology more generally can be a huge tool to improve the quality of the training, both in terms of tailoring the training programs to the needs of the workers and the needs of the company, move away from these general long courses into something which is much more shorter, much more focused, and also away from in-classroom kind of training into actually training that can be performed even remotely and so on and so forth. Again, the technology can be a huge enabler for improving the type of training we offer and the way in which training is actually delivered. And I think the other important point, we definitely have to use more what we call micro-credential. People might not be willing to participate in training because they don't know exactly what they get out of it. They don't get certified for what they've learned over and above the training program. So micro-credential is an important element that I think has to be part of the training program themselves. Now, another interesting point is that we ask workers whether or not they were consulted by the fact that the company they were working in use artificial intelligence. And here is an interesting result. Whether we look at performances, the fact that they were consulted improved dramatically their performance, both in general, in the 7 countries we ran the analysis to, but also in particular in the United States. So I think one of the messages coming from that is that, yes, use the technology, let us know that technology is used, and let us know for which purposes it is used, and what you expect me, worker, to do side by side by the technology. In some cases, it's obvious, because again, as I said before, some of the tasks were no longer performed by the worker, so the worker was, of course, aware. But the fact that it was consultation, the way the technology was used, actually was something that contributed to the productivity performance of the worker, and also the satisfaction of the workers got on the job itself. So a message here is that, yes, use the technology, but also make sure that you engage the workers in the decision to use the technology, what are the outcomes of the technology, and what you expect from them in terms of also training, retraining, in order to improve their performance side by side with the technology. One issue that, of course, emerges when we ask the workers is also the significant concern they have about privacy. The fact that they think that the technology itself may actually impinge on or basically got into their privacy, into fairness, may affect the labor rights, and they might not be fully transparent and understandable. So they don't know exactly how it is used, for which purpose, what are the outcomes, and to some extent what they can do in order to also guide the process of the use of the technology itself. So the accountability and basically the explainability of the use of the technology seems to be an important point over and above the technology, the use of the technology itself. So these are some of the highlights of the employment outlook. Is much more in the publication itself, but just want to give you a glimpse. Hopefully this will generate a good debate with our panelists. But let me move on to the so what. So from what I said, I think the so what has to do, first and foremost, try to understand what are the barriers to greater adoption of the technology. There is great potential out there. This has to do, of course, also with information on the employer side about the potential of the technology. But in my view, from a policy point of view, has to do with investing massively more in training and retraining of the workers. However, as you see, there were a number of concerns about the labor right, about privacy, about discrimination, many issues that actually have to force us to promote what we call a trustworthy AI, not just any AI, but trustworthy AI. Now, of course, the first important point we have to make is that AI is not operating in a vacuum, by no means. We do have in the US, in all of the OECD countries, privacy, regulation, protecting privacy, protecting labor rights, protecting against discrimination, health and safety, and so on and so forth. We have actually good policy principles. The OECD was the first in 2019 to come up with very detailed policy principles on trustworthy AI that cover basically all the range from cybersecurity to privacy to labor rights and so on and so forth. So to some extent, we know what we have to do in terms of providing the framework in which we can get the most out of artificial intelligence and minimizing some of the risk related to artificial intelligence. Problem is that technology is evolving very rapidly, and both the potential and the risk, of course, evolve likewise. And we have to adapt and be able and willing to adapt very quickly. However, the important point is, given the fact that technology is penetrating our production processes, is penetrating our economy, our societies, how can we move from principles into the implementation of these principles? I think it's clear that we cannot ban AI, we cannot regulate each and every use of artificial intelligence, especially generative AI. And therefore, I thought that the very recent Biden's executive statement, as well as the approach that the EU is taking with the EUI Act, has an interesting approach that I want to share with you. So this is based on the risk assessment. So let's identify those areas in which AI has too many risks given the benefit we can take. And maybe we can avoid, not allow AI to operate in this. There are only a few areas, I guess. Second, let's identify those areas in which the risk is significant, but still the benefit may overcome the cost if it is properly regulated. And then those areas in which there is no need for regulation, because I think we can let the technology to play out. Now, in those areas where there are risks, significant risk, the second step, in my view, is to assess whether or not the existing legislation, regulation already protect us against this risk. So there is no need for intervention. Maybe there is a need to adapt our legislation, our regulatory system, in order to make sure that it covers some of the nuances of risk that AI might bring about, right? And this should be the focus of the policy intervention, with a big, big but. And that given the fact that we are in a democracies, it takes time to pass regulations. These go through democratic processes, and before the regulation are actually endorsed and approved, maybe the technology has already evolved. So not only we have to think about what type of regulation do we really need, what kind of adaptation existing laws and regulation we need to put in place, but also we have to make sure these laws and these regulations are sufficiently flexible to basically take into account or to anticipate what might be, so to some extent, the possible next development of artificial intelligence. I was at Google this morning, and they're already thinking about not generative AI, but artificial general intelligence. And general means that basically it's not one model doing one thing, it's actually a model doing everything, or many of the things we do as humans. So this is already where the technology is going. And the big, big challenge in my view is indeed what are smart regulations that can also to some extent foresee what might be the changes and will not be obsolete by the time basically they are introduced. Let me conclude by quoting David Autor, well-known labor economist in the US, which I think is a good way to think through these issues. He says, instead of asking what artificial intelligence can do in abstract terms, let's ask what we want the technology, artificial intelligence, to do for us. And that should be the guiding principles, not just let the technology do whatever they want, but let's try to see whether we can get the maximum benefit, we humans, by the use of this technology. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
And Diana, we have you here. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you all. Thank you, Stefano. That was a lot to think about. Thanks, y'all. So I'm Michelle Nellenbach. I am the Vice President for Strategic Initiatives here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And boy, we're just thrilled that Stefano made time in his busy U.S. tour to stop here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. We wanted to invite a couple guests to talk through what we just heard. So we have Diana Furchtgott-Roth, who is the director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment, and the Herbert Joyce Morgan Fellow in Energy and Environmental Policy at the Heritage Foundation. She is also the former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. And next to her is Dr. Harry Holzer, who is the John Lafarge Jr. S.J. Professor of Public Policy at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy. He is also a former chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. So this should be a fun conversation. And thank you also to Doug and the University of Maryland for their partnership with this wonderful event. So I want to dive in here and let Diane and Harry, we just heard a lot of information from Stefano. So I just wanted to get your thoughts. So Diana, do you want to kick us off with just a couple minutes to?
Sure. And I also want to say that next time for a fun event, don't invite two former chief economists of the U.S. Department of Labor. You maybe want to invite some people from, I don't know, Google and Microsoft or something like that. They would be a lot more entertaining. Well, I'd like to start out with a story. This is a young person who asked my advice because she had been recruited for a job that involves outreach to different think tanks in Washington. And her question was, should she accept it? Because English was not her first language. And she was worried that she would make mistakes in emails and therefore bring down people's perceptions of her and her organization. And I said, look, now there's ChatGPT. You can take your email, you can put it into ChatGPT, and it can correct the grammar for you. So what I'm trying to say is that ChatGPT and other AI technologies can be of immense benefit also to low-skilled workers. You can regard them as a junior assistant. No longer do you have to worry about making typos or grammatical errors in a letter where you're applying for an internship, or you want to reply to your boss, or you're writing a letter on behalf of your boss. It can have immense benefits. So whereas some people might be concerned that, yes, some jobs might be lost due to AI, there are other people who can be more productive because of AI. And I'd also like to mention small businesses, farmers, people in the medical profession. Let's take farmers, for example. These days, with a cell phone, and farmers in developing countries, emerging economies, they all have cell phones these days. They're charged using solar power. It's very prevalent because their governments have not managed to have landline telephones like Fios, like Doug has been able to get at his home. So you can take your smartphone, you can look at the quality of the soil, and AI can tell you what would be good to plant this season, whether it's soybeans or wheat or rice or whatever, based on the prices of the goods, the prices of fertilizer, how much it will get at the market. And this kind of thing was not possible beforehand. Again, this is benefiting farmers in emerging economies, and also farmers, I would say, here in the United States. Another example is telemedicine. We can go to urgent care centers. But again, let's look at people in out-of-the-way areas, people in emerging economies. This can be of immense benefit, and also not just looking at what is wrong with you right now, what you think you might be sick with, but is it going anywhere else? Is this an epidemic? Is it a pandemic? Is it spreading in your area? Is it spreading in other areas? And this is the kind of thing we were starting to track with COVID, but now with AI, we can get it down to the man in the street. So I would say that the possibilities for these technologies are very, very promising. As we heard before, there's always concern when there's a new technology that it's going to displace workers. And we have more productive employment. We have low unemployment right now. The tractors did not result in lower productivity for farmers. The steam engine didn't take away jobs in the aggregate economy. Some jobs were lost, but other jobs were created, and our rate of economic growth grew. I just want to say one last word about President Biden's executive order to different agencies to regulate AI. And we need to be very wary of our government regulating this technology, especially when that agency does not have congressional authorization to do so. I think that we should be very careful, because often regulation of new technologies has been bungled. The federal government has chosen the wrong particular technology to bet on, and it's much better to see how these things develop and let the chips fall where they may. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the other chief economists' comments.
Thank you. We thank Stefano for his talk. Everything he said was very sensible and made a lot of sense for labor economists. And maybe I'll just elaborate on a few of the things that he said and flesh them out a little more. So first of all, the impact of new kinds of technology on the workplace do occur with a big lag. And that's why we know so little right now. We're in the middle of that lag. Some of you may remember, at least those of my age, when digital automation started to occur in the 1980s, Bob Solow, Bob Solow is the great economist at MIT, won a Nobel Prize for his analysis of technical change. He said, geez, isn't it strange that we see the effects of digital technology everywhere except in productivity? Then, of course, in the 90s, that productivity actually did start to boom, and a lot of that promise did. But right now, it's very early, and employers, I think, really are just trying to figure out what are these things about, ChatGPT and other things, to figure out how to most effectively use it in their business. That will take some time. But secondly, there have always been winners and losers from new technology among workers. And of course, economists have this concept. Are you more of a substitute or more of a complement to new technology? If you're a substitute, you're probably going to get hurt because new technology is going to do what you do and probably do it better and faster and higher quality. But if you're a complement, you're probably better off because, and the example Diana gave about the person who now, if their English isn't so good, that now the AI will complement them in a way and make them in some sense more employable. So I think that is the right way to think about this. And Stefano talked about tasks, and tasks are also an important way to think about this because it's likely AI is not going to make some jobs completely substitutable and others. It depends on the set of tasks that workers do and which of those AI will do better, right? So it'll be, and if only 20% or 30% of your current tasks will soon be done by AI, it is likely that your employer will have an incentive to keep you on and retrain you, right? Because hiring and training new people is costly for a business, right? So if it's a small part, they have an incentive to retrain you and still reap the benefits of their earlier fixed investments in you. On the other hand, if AI does 70, 80% of what you do, you're probably more likely to be displaced, again, unless you are very significantly retrained. And economists talk a lot about something called the skill bias in new technology. Historically, new technologies have had a skill bias, right? That more highly educated workers are more likely to be complements. Think of technicians, engineers, other people, whereas less skilled workers, production workers, clerical workers, et cetera, were substitutes. And by the way, the magnitudes of the people hurt because of digital technologies was very high. I mean, a lot of labor economists think the primary reason for the wide increase in inequality since the 1980s is because of digital technologies and the skill bias. I think, as both Diana and Stefano suggested, this time it seems less likely that it seems like the technologies might complement a wider swath of workers and might go higher up the education chain in terms of whose tasks are replaced. But I think the skill bias might still occur because of who adapts to that. And Stefano very clearly, and the one diagram about the little, the middle skilled workers versus the unskilled workers getting, that I think will be the problem. I think folks like us will be better at figuring out how to upgrade our skills to make ourselves complementary. Non-college workers may have more difficulty with that, and their employers, we have a huge bias in on-the-job training in the United States towards professional and managerial workers. Employers are much willing to invest folks like us rather than more blue-collar workers or pink-collar workers, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. But that's the thing to worry about how do we help more of these people adapt, and how do we help employers make those decisions? And we don't have to take that employer implementation decision as a given. Various things can implement how employers, and Stefano had the nice example of when workers are consulted, they like it better, they're happy with the technology. More broadly, when workers have some voice, whether they get it through a union. Now, most workers in America are not unionized and will not be unionized anywhere anytime soon. But there's other mechanisms of worker voice that can help. Another thing, things like the tax system. Drona Acemoglu at MIT says the current tax system so much over-subsidizes capital relative to labor that he thinks it's going to tip the balance and that employers will be more likely to implement technologies that might not even give them big productivity bumps because the taxes, so that's something that's fixable if we want to encourage employers to implement this in a way that has more broad shared benefits. Last thing, is AI different? Is this time different? Is there something unique about this? Qualitatively, I would say no. All the adjustment mechanisms that have existed in the past that made the Luddites wrong, and again, Diana nicely had some of those examples, will exist now. And the incentives of workers and employers to help the adjustment process will exist. I worry a little about the quantity, because if the number of tasks that might be replaceable at some time in the near future might be a lot, and it might burden the adjustment systems of all the different workers who quickly have to learn how to adapt to this new world. And the other thing is it's a moving target. And that wasn't nearly as much true in the past. In the past, think of a century ago. Henry Ford invents the assembly line. Coach and buggy, drivers, builders, were wiped out. They had to find new things to do. But it was a fairly discrete jump in technology. My fear a little bit about AI is that it will be a moving target for workers to have to adjust to. So they might learn how to deal with the technologies that are out there now, but then very quickly they'll have to, and that characteristic actually might make it better for productivity if the gains of the productivity are widely shared, if the markets are competitive enough. But it might make it harder for these workers seeking adaptation. So I'll stop there. Lots of interesting, certainly positives, and some potentials to worry about as well.
Great. Well, thank you both. I mean, clearly, I tend to be one of those who thinks the positives about the AI far outweigh the potential negatives. I see my colleague Bill over there looking at me. He and I disagree on that one. But this concern about the workforce is real and tangible, and you talk to any member of Congress, you're hearing about it from their constituents, and listening to both Diana and Harry, there's a lot of mights, there's a lot of coulds. We don't really know what the impact will be. And part of that goes to your point, Harry, the technology is changing so much faster than anyone can ever really get their hand around. So I'm wondering, Stefano, let's just say you're talking to a recent college graduate, or a new high school graduate. What do you tell them about preparing for this job market with AI out there, and how do they prepare for this?
That's a $1 million question. Dollar question. Listen, I fully agree with what I said. It's actually a great pleasure to be with two chief economists of the Department of Labor. It's really impressive. Thank you for this opportunity. Think about some of the entry jobs for people with a degree, high degree, right? A junior lawyer, a junior designer. Some of these jobs may actually be tremendously affected because a number of tasks that a junior lawyer entering a law firm can actually be performed by generative AI. Yet, they might be performing other things. So what is my message to a college graduate? First of all, you have to have strong foundational skills, regardless of your specialization. And second of all, forget about the fact that you learn what you learn in education, college, that you get into the labor market, whatever you have learned, you're going to use it throughout your working life. You have to go into the notion that you might have to adapt your skills, even if you actually leave education with a high level of a high degree. I was in a panel conference, and then there was a professor say, listen, one of my best students came back after 3 years. Professor, I have to study again because basically in my job, the tasks have changed so much that basically what I learned at university is no longer enough. I think we have to get into this mentality that's exactly what might happen to most people. I think young people have all this potential for doing that. They're used to basically not have their life divided into education one point in their part of their life, and then use whatever they've learned in education into the labor market. I'm slightly more worried about adults already into the labor market. I think, is this time different? I think no, but I think there are two elements which actually affect in my view, the labor market. One is the speed and the depth of the changes. We're looking at the changes which are extremely rapid, as you said, and they're also very deep, very widespread. So the question, in my view, is whether or not those already into the labor market were not used to basically continuously learn, or have this mentality of learning continuously, have the ability to do that, have the opportunity for doing so, but also adapt to this new world in which they cannot assume that whatever they've learned 20 years ago is still going to be relevant. So we have to give them opportunity, but also they have to change the mindset whereby learning becomes sort of a continuous part of your life, even if you are 30, 40, 50, and so on. We are not there yet, that's what I'm saying.
So one of the things we've talked about is like lifelong learning and accounts that would encourage that. I mean, Diana or Harry, do you have anything to add to what Stefano said?
Yeah, no, I very much agree with Stefano that it's very important to be treating your job in terms of, and your learning, your education, as a series of jobs throughout your lifetime. And you might be training yourself for the first one, but there's going to be a lot of other jobs, and you cannot predict what technology is going to be out there. You cannot predict what you're going to be doing. I mean, a job like a social influencer, that didn't exist 20 years ago. And now these social influencers can make millions, and there's other many jobs I could list. But the important thing is also that employers, I think, are more and more involved in on-the-job learning. They know that these new kind of techniques come up, and they are also offering online training to their employees, especially now here in the United States. We have 9.6 million unfilled jobs. You can't just fire somebody and expect to be getting somebody else. You need to make the best use of the workforce that you have. So as Stefano said, workers need to have fundamental skills. They need to get those fundamental skills and be prepared for a lifetime of potential changes and doing additional training with employers helping.
I agree with that as well. On the first piece of that, what is it that constitutes these foundational or fundamental skills that people have? Some of them are actually understanding the technology. Everyone knows this term digital literacy. One of my daughters was a sociology major in college, but she quickly learned some digital literacy, and it did help her, get a job in doing communications. So the right foundational skill can make you much more adaptable to this world. I think not just digital, but now they're going to need AI literacy, and I think it'll be important for people to understand what this new technology is doing, so they can figure out how to prepare and how to adapt to it. But of course, the other foundational things are things that are more complementary, like the critical thinking that Stefano mentioned in his talk, some of the communication skills, some of those things. So there's different buckets of foundational things. Some of them are directly related to the automation, and some different. But then how do we all agree that workers will need to be doing more learning over the course of their lives. And there was this expression, lifelong learning, which became a bit of a punchline at various points in the 90s and in the aughts. But I think more and more it will be true. And the question is, how do you help workers do more of that? Some states, a few states have already implemented something they call lifelong learning accounts, where every pay period, employers deduct a little bit from the paycheck and set up an account for workers right? And then one can conceivably imagine that the public sector could even subsidize some of that, or subsidize it for the less educated workers. So that's one approach. I think a lot of things would have to be different in the community college system to reach the full potential. But I also agree with both other speakers that virtual learning does have the potential to make a lot of this retraining much more accessible to people than it has been historically. And of course, if that potential is realized, that would be a really big plus.
Great. And one I forgot to mention for those of you watching us online, you can add questions on Twitter or YouTube, and we will post them in the room, and then I'll circulate a mic in the room in just in another minute or so. But I do want to touch on the international aspect of this, because that was clearly a large part of your presentation. So you referenced President Biden's executive order on AI. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences you see between the U.S. approach to AI in the workplace relative to other countries? Are there any countries taking a particularly unique approach? And then I'd love to hear your thoughts, Diana and Harry, if there's anything you...
Oh, thank you very much. I think if you were to ask me this question only a week ago, I would have said, well, there is basically two broad approach. I mean, everybody agrees on the basic principles, right? So all member countries of the OECD, G20 countries have signed on the OECD principle of trustworthy AI. So I think we know what we're talking about, what are the basic principles to get the most out of AI and minimize the risk. The question is more how we move from this principle into the implementation of the principle themselves. So a week ago, I would have said, well, the US has adopted more a sort of a principle-based sort of soft law approach, whereby the guidelines are very detailed, and therefore companies then are supposed to meet these standards and fulfill these guidelines. Maybe no surprise, Europe potentially has taken a different approach, because it's moving more into the risk assessment, identify areas in which there might be regulatory gaps, and therefore intervening there through regulation a week ago. Today, of course, we have sort of the executive order by President Biden on the one hand, which is very much moving into risk assessment and possibly intervention through regulation. And just today, we have learned that two of the major countries of Europe, Germany and France, are actually raising some issues as to whether the EU has to adopt a UI AI Act, because they are concerned that at least in one of the dimensions is the development of AI tools. This might put Europe basically at a disadvantage compared to the US, compared to China, and so on and so forth. So you see, even that is evolving very rapidly. Everybody understands that we have to make sure this principle are enforced, but the way to do it, as I think all of us, we pointed out, is not obvious. We don't want to overregulate it. We don't want to actually pretend to reduce the pace of development of the new technology, because there's a huge potential out there. Potential for productivity growth, potential also for improving the quality of jobs, so I have a lot of positive impact for the workers. But we do understand that we have to intervene. We don't know exactly how to intervene in a context in which the technology itself is evolving very rapidly. One of the things I mentioned, let me be more clear, it's not just the cost that the employer face and that actually are preventing them from using more AI, is also the uncertainty as to if something goes wrong. I use AI to select new staff, right, in the selection process, and then someone challenged my decision because there was a discrimination, perceived discrimination in the decision. Who is responsible? Is the one who designed the algorithm? Is the data that they are going to use, or the way in which the humans interpret the result from the algorithm? So to some extent, clarify where is the responsibility, and having the human in the decision-making progress, whatever the technology is there, whatever is the algorithm, the humans has to be there and has to be part of the use of the technology and decision-taking on the base of the technology. In my view, the technology has to be a supplement of what we humans have to do. We cannot fully have the technology taking decision for us. That's, in my view, is the basic principles. Then I think in terms of intervention, there are different approaches. One thing is clear, that you cannot have one country, not even one region, regulating and the other not following, because these are international. Of course, this may lead to certain imbalances and certain not lead to the kind of outcomes you want. So cooperation is absolutely essential. The G7 had already the Hiroshima process. The Hiroshima process is moving into now some common decisions. The G20 is looking into that. Of course, we need the international community to talk about it and to possibly move again from principles into implementation, even if we'll only be on the basic areas where the risks are extremely high and when common regulation, common approach may actually make sense.
Harry or Diana?
Well, I think we need to be very careful we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, and certain regions can compete. In other words, you can have different regulatory areas, with the United States using one approach, Europe and Asia using different approaches, and we just see what happens and what the best systems are. But here in the United States, we need congressional authorization for regulation. Agencies can't just pick up and do it by themselves. I understand it's a little bit different in the EU. The EU can decide it's going to do some regulation, do it for all the countries. That's maybe one reason why we've had a lot faster GDP growth here in the United States than in Europe. We have more leeway with regulations. We are not so incumbent with burdensome regulations. But there are certain areas it's important to regulate. For example, AI is used in automated vehicles. The Transportation Department regulates not AI, but the safety of automated vehicles on the road, so they're not posing a risk to the public. So it's in those ways where different agencies have the authority to regulate particular products that we will find regulation of AI.
I agree with much of that. It is simply too early to know how to do this and how to do it effectively. And as Stefano said, we can over-regulate, we can under-regulate. I wouldn't be surprised if we have some of both. We do regulate less than the EU. They also have vastly less inequality than we do. So there are costs and benefits with different kinds of regulation. But we simply don't know. And when I actually read the Biden executive order this week, and a lot of it is best practices, guidelines, but no one knows what those things are yet. The really bad idea, the folks that were saying, we should have at least a 6-month moratorium on AI development, that was silly. That was foolish, right? Because our competitors are not going to have a moratorium. And we need, the way you're going to learn is having experience as AI evolves and working with it. So we should do this carefully. We should do it thoughtfully. I think the executive order goes in the right direction, but it really will take some time, which are the right ways and the right places to regulate and which not.
Great. Do we have any questions from anyone in the room? We have someone with a microphone, I think.
Hi, John Sersha on Bipartisan Policy Center. So one question I have is, right now, a lot of the debates in the US around labor issues tend to be around like minimum wage, collective bargaining, social safety net. Do you think the rise of AI is going to change the nature of those debates, or do you think we'll still see the same arguments and sort of like political positioning as before?
I think, on the one hand, I think automation in many ways can make it easier for employers to replace their workers. In the lingo of economists, demand curves become more elastic, and that makes it in some ways maybe a little harder to raise. One of my arguments against a $15 federal minimum wage is I think that will speed up a lot of automation. You're going to see many more robots flipping burgers and cleaning hotel rooms, and right. So it makes it sometimes harder to do those kinds of things, and yet it might make the need for something to improve job quality and improve standards, right? And if you look at David Autor's book with Elizabeth Reynolds and I think David Mindell, they talk a lot about job quality and the potential upside, the potential downsides. And so it might require a different form of how you create the incentives for employers to create good jobs and to implement this in a way that complements their workers. Are there other approaches besides old-fashioned mandates to do this? The need will be as great or greater, but the right way to do it. And in terms of, in terms of safety net, I don't think any of us think that UBI, University Basic Income, is a great idea, right? We want to see people working. Work is very important. But again, how do you subsidize workers' wages? What kinds of, do you want to expand the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit? Lots of ways there, and I think that will be the interesting place to discuss these things.
Well, I certainly don't think that AI is going to take the focus away from issues of inequality, because those are always brought up again and again. And there are many reasons for the higher levels of inequality in the United States than Europe. I mean, one reason is that Europe has higher tax rates, in general higher income tax rates, then a higher social security tax, then they have 20 to 25% value-added taxes. And then the transfer payments are higher too. So you get more taken off people's incomes and more given to lower income individuals. Inequality has increased in the United States since the 1980s. One reason is the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which vastly lowered individual income taxes compared to corporate income taxes. So some income that had been on the corporate tax rolls was then moved to individuals. And so they showed a higher income. We also have more dual incomes. On average, households in the top income quintile, the top fifth, have 2 earners. Those in the middle have 1 earner. Those in the bottom fifth have half an earner, or 1 earner for every 2 households. And the best way to get rid of income inequality in the United States is to say women are not allowed to work anymore. You can only have 1, or you can only have 1 worker per household. And that would take just a lot of people in the top fifth off out of that particular bracket. But of course, no one wants to do that. Everyone wants the freedom to be able to work as much as they can. And in the United States, more people take risks. And with people taking risks, sometimes they lose, and sometimes they have very big payoffs. We have more people living longer, which is good. We have more divorces, so there are more single people at the bottom than there used to be. And it's very difficult to measure income and wealth. So for example, someone who's retired who doesn't have any income might be living in a nice apartment on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and that person doesn't show a lot of income but has a lot of assets. So those are just a few thoughts. I don't think AI is going to take the lens off any of these issues, because they're really entrenched in the debate as to what level of taxes we want to have, what level of distributions we want to have.
If I can add a word on that, because I fully agree with what has been said, that you're a better expert than me. I think it's difficult that the focus can go away from inequality of, to some extent, support for groups who are disadvantaged for different reasons. I think I wish if more focus were given to opportunities giving people opportunities. And I think, again, we have been discussing that today. AI can potentially open new opportunities because it can really be a complement to the competence, the skills that workers have. Even those workers that may not have achieved certain jobs because they were lacking from some of the key competence can perform these tasks much better. Which means also investing, if we're talking about opportunity, we're also talking about, again, investing in their training and retraining, in their human capital. And I think the fact that in the US and many other countries, we're observing what I think is a structural labor shortage problem. It's not just something which is post-COVID, seems to be pretty structural. It's actually across the board. It's not just in the high-tech digital jobs, but actually it's across the board. It means that employers do see sort of the lack of workers with the right skills. So I think even the employers might be more willing to participate into the investment in opportunities if they're given the right option in terms of how to invest on something which actually makes a difference for them. So I think really we have to rethink seriously training and retraining programs. And I think, again, the technology can be a huge enabler because we don't have to go to the old way of long classroom-based training, which we know they're not particularly effective. We can actually design very specific, tailored, short training that actually meet the needs of the workers and the needs of the employers. So, but this is, in my view, requires a change in the mentality from all sides, government first and foremost, but also employers and to some extent the workers themselves.
And with that, we're going to call it, draw the event to a close. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. This was a great conversation. Clearly, a lot more could be said about AI in the workforce. So keep an eye on our website, and you obviously can find all of these folks too at their institutions. So thank you all for joining us today.